Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, whatever time it is. This is 0 Hour Thoughts with me, Jamie, co-hosting with my good friend.
Ujwal.
Good to see you as well.
Good to see you as well. How have you been today?
Yeah, I've been a bit busy at work. Apart from that, just great. I mean, I've been doing my two full-time jobs, basically. Yeah, teaching assistant and a tour guide. But I have the weekend off.
Oh, okay, at least you got 2 days off.
How are you?
I'm alright. I had this uni today. So
Yeah.
uni and the podcast now.
Right.
Same as usual. And
Yeah.
hopefully to last for a long time.
Well, I'm excited to have this chat today, actually.
Oh, wow, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
very, very excited. We're talking about...
We got a lot to talk about. We're talking about the UK.
UK,
the
yeah.
United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And that is a mouthful. It's a long
That's
name.
a very long name.
Long name, long history. Predominant culture is the English culture. But basically, what I've got planned is we're going to talk about the history for a bit, because I majored in history, and that's generally where I went to when I thought about this country and the culture. And then afterwards, we're going to talk about more relevant stuff, more political stuff, as well as we'll talk a bit about... Shall I open up?
Yeah.
So we'll talk a bit about comedy. We'll also talk about Parliament. We're going to talk about London in the 21st century. Just a bit about everything, really getting the full picture, I suppose.
Yeah.
We're trying to uncover the truth.
From the perspective of young people who is having to live in the UK in 21st century.
Yeah, because we are young people ourselves, and I think it's reassuring to hear these things come from people you can relate to. Yeah.
All right. So let's start.
Let's start at the very beginning.
Yep.
So this is a bit complex, but useful to understand, and there's some things which trend over time. So we start off with the Britannic people. The Celts. The Britannic is not the same word as Britain, but it's sort of where it came from. And these were the natives. Excuse me. So the natives were ruling there until the Romans came between 50 BC and 200 AD. And in that space of time, under Julius Caesar, the Romans established a place called Londinium.
Yes, I've heard of that.
The city of Londinium. And along with that, they brought their Latin language and their technical knowledge, things like architecture and what's it called? Forging materials and such. And a lot of that got lost, actually, during the Dark Ages. So you hear about these King Arthur legends and such. We know it came from the 500s, but we don't actually know who ruled England in that period of time, from like 200 to 800.
Oh, okay.
That's quite a long
That's
period
a long
of time,
time,
really.
yeah. So Dark Ages, why was it called Dark Ages?
Because nothing got written down, basically. Once the Romans had packed up, they basically told their delegations in Londinium that you will not receive any more support from us.
Oh, okay.
And that means the language died. You know, they didn't use Latin. They reverted to more local languages.
Were they the one who brought Christianity in UK as well? Or was it someone different?
So, arguably, that started with the Normans in 1066, because they brought the French culture. And the French culture was a majority Christian culture, Catholic Christian culture. But before that point, we had the Danish rule.
Okay.
So what people don't tend to realise about the English kings and queens, for example, is many of the kings have been Danish, or they've been French, or they've been German.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's been a few times where the king doesn't even speak the same language of the people that they're ruling.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So the king is not... kings are never relatable, but at that point they are like out of...
Yeah.
They are like otherworldly people.
Right.
If they can't even speak the same language as you can.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So this started with the Anglo-Saxons. Everyone's probably familiar with the term. Angle is what eventually became the word England.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And Anglo-Saxon is considered... your identity. So if you were to sign some official documents and you were to say you're white, if you're white British, that would mean you're probably Anglo-Saxon, meaning your DNA is probably the same as a Danish person's.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Saxons, where did they come from?
They came from just like
North of Germany?
Yeah, north of Germany, between Denmark and the Netherlands.
Oh, okay.
There was also Jutland. So they had the Jutes. I think the Jutes were from Jutland, and the Jutes settled in this part of the region in the south of Hampshire.
Okay.
And then they also had the Saxons and the Angles. Basically, the one that everyone knows about is Alfred the Great.
Oh, yeah.
We're here in the city of Winchester, which was the capital of Wessex and Mercia, arguably the first technical king, but this was before the idea of England existed.
Yeah. I learned about that by watching a series called Vikings.
I've not seen this. What's it like?
So basically, it's about the Vikings from Kattegat is the place where they originate from. It's like somewhere in Norway apparently, but the Vikings came from Sweden and the other part. So it's I think that part of the series is a bit false in that sense, in the historical sense. But yeah, it's basically them trying to find a new land, go to a new land because they want to conquer a new land for
the Vikings.
Agriculture. Yeah. And they do so the pillages and all that, all the horrible stuff they did. Like when they went to small islands and the priest and all that, they basically killed them or looted them, raped the women and all that. Yeah. So it's basically about that. And then you also see the Wessex, the Sussex, the Mercia, and Essex and Mercia and all those kingdoms, and the King Alfred tries to basically make a coalition kind of, so that they can fight against the Vikings. So
and that fight didn't stop for a long time, 1800s until maybe 1066.
Oh wow!
And it was I forget the name. I want to say Edward the Confessor. I could be wrong, but it was the king at the time. He went all the way to the north of England to fight the Vikings, but by the time he made it to the north and had won the battle, the French were invading in Hastings.
Oh, wow.
And then he came down, and it said that he got shot with an arrow to the eye.
Oh, wow.
But actually, what people don't realise is that's a technical misfact, and actually he wasn't shot in the eye. And the picture that is often referred to is this tapestry, which has the Battle of Hastings. One guy gets shot in the eye in that picture, but it's not actually the king. It's not actually Edward, or I think it's Edward or Harold. But it's not the king that gets shot in the eye. That's a trope.
Oh.
Anyway.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, so basically, this city of Winchester was England's first capital for 100 years. This is where they kept the Domesday Book.
Oh, okay.
So the Domesday Book was called the Great Survey, and it's basically the first proof of taking record of all commoners under one society. Yeah, and it's considered like the world's first record of common people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why is it called Doomsday Book? Because the name Doomsday
it means it's final. So there's no debating it. It's final.
Okay, so whatever is written in the book is the final verdict.
It's the last statement, basically.
Okay.
And it was basically a huge form of taxation.
Okay.
But this was a testament to the Normans, because the Normans were known for being very technical and very organised.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So let me ask you one thing.
Go on.
So many kings have name Edward the Third or King Henry the Seventh and all that. Why did they stick with the same name, like Henry, 7 different kings?
That's interesting.
And same thing with the Queen as well. And all, so why do you think they stuck with the same name?
I think it's because they're biblical names. Actually, they relate to characters from the Bible.
Okay.
And it's the same with France. They had I think 14 Louis.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I think
it is interesting to know that. And so I read this thing in one article where it said basically one of them did such a great job that they wanted to be associated with them by having the same name. Like William the Conqueror was the technically the first king of England and all that, and so people like to associate with him. So if they have his name, then they can exude the power that he had. So I read that, so I'm not really sure if that is true or not, but
it's possible. What do you mean? Like they claimed to have a name that wasn't theirs?
So basically, if a king, William, the first king, William the Conqueror, his significance is so huge in the culture that if other king comes and has the same name, they can exude the same kind of significance.
Oh, it's possible that there's that reason to naming them.
Yeah.
That would make sense. I think so. I mean, especially when you get to the Georges, there were 4 Georges in the row.
Yeah.
So they're like, my son's George, and then this guy was like, my son's George, and then I guess out of process of deduction, he was like, right, well, my first son's got to be called George too then.
Yeah.
Well, George 4.
George 4. Yeah, the confusion must be
Yeah.
like, imagine making all the tablets and everything, and you have to you can't make mistakes saying George 1 or 2nd or 3rd.
Yeah. Well, I know at school, like when we were studying the Tudors, some
Mm.
kids would write Elizabeth II.
Oh, okay, well.
Because they just make the mistakes, easy mistakes. But something that I wanted to move on to was, because it was Norman, that meant that the official language of this country was French, and that stayed with the Angevin kings and the Plantagenets, and these royal families were ruling the middle section of France and England at the same time, and this meant that the ruling class spoke French.
Okay.
No ruling people spoke English. None of the barons spoke English. Nobody knew English except the people who were being controlled.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is very interesting.
And that was for 400 years. And that didn't end in 1485.
So basically what you're saying is king spoke a language that was not spoken by the commoners.
Yeah.
And so kings and queens always, they are some unattainable people. They are like heavenly people. They're associated with gods, and the gods give them power to rule.
Right.
But imagine having a king and queen who don't even speak your language.
Yeah.
So they are even way more unattainable. It's like you can't go and speak with them or.
Well, actually, this brings me to an interesting segue, which is a bit skipping ahead of time, but it's relevant. Is we had King Charles I.
Yeah.
Charles I did not speak English. He was born and raised in Germany.
Oh, wow.
He inherited the throne by deduction, and under Charles I, they had the first ever prime minister.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what is deduction? How did that work?
What I mean by deduction is there was no king, because the king didn't have a son, or they didn't have a child, or they didn't have a cousin.
Oh,
so it's the next line, so it might have been his cousin, basically.
Okay.
And that was the Hanover, yeah. So that was Charles Hanover. And under Charles, they had the first prime minister. And the prime minister was essentially a translator from German to English. Yeah.
So the first prime minister's job was to translate.
Yeah, that was it. That was it. But his role was so influential that people disassociated with the king. King Charles I ended up with his head on a spike on London Bridge.
Why? What did he do?
Well, I guess he was German. He didn't know any English.
Oh.
They hated him, and he is the only king who basically was executed.
By the people?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And that led to the one and only president, the Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell.
Oh, wow. That's a mouthful of name.
Oliver Cromwell was called the Lord Protector.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's argued in recent years that what he established was essentially a military dictatorship, a coup, because after that, the people then brought back the king.
Okay, so it was the people who brought back the king.
Yeah.
When they had the president.
Yeah.
So how was it like when UK was republic basically at the time? So how was it like? Were people more happy with the politics and all that? I mean, certainly not, because they brought back the king. But how was it? Because it had never happened before or even after.
Well, the thing is that people obeyed it, and this is a timeless thing of the English people, is that the people who aren't leaders simply obey.
Oh,
And actually, nobody did anything. And the only reason that we restored the monarchy was because Oliver Cromwell died of old age.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if he had not died of old age, or had said, okay, then my successor will be this person,
right,
then they would have been the president.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay. So the history could have gone way, way, way differently for England.
If that was the case, it's possible we wouldn't even have America, because it was George III who was taxing the Americans. But if we had a president, maybe we'd never tax them,
Oh, yeah. So then America would still be part of England.
It's alternative history. It's fun to fantasize about these things.
Yeah.
They're interesting.
That's very interesting.
So I just want to skip ahead a bit.
Yeah.
I want to talk about this thing, which is the Stuart family. So after the Tudors, who were considered a big part of English culture, maybe I should talk about the Tudors too. I'll do that later. Anyway,
that word Tudors, is this where the architecture style, the Tudor architecture style comes from?
Yeah, the Tudor architect. So Tudor were probably the second biggest culture, in my opinion, second to the Victorians. So
Okay.
Victorians first, I would say, is the most influential culture in this country. Second is the Tudor culture. Tudor architecture. Winchester's filled with Tudor architecture. Also, the flag of this county, Hampshire
Yeah.
County, is the Tudor rose.
Okay.
Um,
So I was watching like this documentary about the German villages in Argentina, and
Yeah.
and the villages they showed like the houses they were made. The architecture was like the Tudor architecture style,
okay.
and I thought like it was the Tudor architecture
Mm.
comes from Germany rather than it was the
Ah,
organic of
right.
the England. So I asked a bunch of
Mm.
friends, but they didn't really know, and
Yeah.
I wanted to know from you if
Okay.
you know anything
Yeah,
about that.
I believe what the Germans predominantly make is something called Gothic culture.
Oh, okay.
And Gothic, obviously you think of the word goth, right?
Yeah.
All in black and stuff. But I may be wrong on this. I think it started in Gothenburg, the German city. And their style of architecture is very dark, lots of dark greens, lots of greys. And they like to use the shapes of trees.
Oh,
So
yeah.
if you look
Yeah.
at the Winchester Cathedral, the window panels are shaped in the shape of like a branch coming up like that.
Okay.
And that's so they sort of merge into the tree landscape.
Yeah.
But it's possible they had aspects of Tudor history as well,
Yeah.
or they
So
got
it-
inspired.
So it's not basically like organic English architecture style, or maybe it was like the architecture style that was exported from England
Right.
to the Europe where it became accepted.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
there's a mixed match there somewhere. And also,
Mhm.
something that's interesting to mention is, St. Thomas Church. I'm talking about Winchester because I'm just thinking of things local. St. Thomas Church is like a steeple church that's turned into a fancy house, basically. But what most people don't realise is that was actually put there by the Victorians.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and that was under a process that's called Neo-Gothism. So that's called New Gothic style. And basically the Tudors were making this rustic look. The Victorians were making this rustic look, basically. Yeah.
So like so which architecture would you say is the best architecture in the overall history of UK? Like who made the best buildings and who made the best architectural?
Well, I don't know any in particular, but I know there's the architect called Wren.
Okay.
And Wren, he built the palace, which actually got burned down in 1907, and that's where the military barracks are. In Winchester, there's the military barracks.
Yeah.
Before there, they had a big palace, almost the same size as the Palace of Versailles,
Oh wow.
and that burned in 1907.
Oh, why did it burn?
It was
Is
just
there
a
any
fire,
reason?
natural
Oh, okay.
fire.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, when it comes to things like destruction, there's been a few moments in English history where things have been destroyed.
Yeah, the Great Fire of London is what comes to my mind.
Great Fire of London is the top one.
Yeah.
This actually killed the plague.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Okay. How did that happen?
Okay, something that's very unfortunate, but can be argued as a silver lining, is a lot of the places that got burned in London were very impoverished areas,
Okay.
and so there were lots of rats there. And what was breeding was the plague, and the plague had recently come back to England. It started in the 1400s.
Is it the Black Plague we're talking about?
The Black Death,
Yeah.
and in the 1400s it killed 1/3 of English people.
Oh wow.
Yeah, 1/3 of English people died from the Black
That's
Death.
a lot of people.
Yeah,
So like the Black Plague, is it same as the bubonic plague or is it
it's
like
the same thing.
Okay.
I think bubonic basically refers to the boils,
Okay.
the disgusting
Yeah.
warts.
Yeah.
But something that's interesting about that is, think about it, everyone died,
Yeah.
so this included the rich people.
Yeah.
And the rich people, they had loads of land that was
Yeah.
just open
Yes.
and free.
Yeah.
So what did the peasants do?
They took over the land?
Yeah, they took,
Oh, wow,
they took
okay.
over the land. But
So the wealth was distributed equally.
the wealth was somewhat distributed, I will say that. There was something called the Ordinance of Labourers that came in place in about 1340 something.
So what does that mean?
Basically, King Henry, I think it was
Yeah.
King Henry, basically said, if you are making money now because we've had the Black Death, your wage is going to be restricted to what it was before the Black Death.
Oh, okay, so it's gonna be the same as it was before.
So you're not making more money, basically.
Oh, okay, so even though you own the land,
Because you're a peasant, you're not allowed to make more money.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So this class system in UK,
Right.
so this seems to have existed for a long time. Was it because of the nobles and the peasants and peasants they might not have had enough education or enough knowledge about the land so that they could go and talk with the king and communicate with them. So nobles were basically the peoples who were kind of like translators, who then became the landlords, and then they became so untouchable, so unattainable that the class system was established. Was it like that, or was it because of some other reason?
Yeah, I think the class system sort of stayed in place, but there have been revolutionary moments. Obviously, the Civil War was a great one, with the first and only president. But I wanted to say that actually these things die out because of lack of support. So obviously no one wanted to keep the protectorate, Charles I, because his support died out. Also, something else that lost its support was the Essex Rebellion. So in the early 1600s, Queen Elizabeth was very old. Queen Elizabeth I was very old. And the Essex Rebellion basically wanted to revolt. They marched into London under the impression that they were going to have crowds of people.
Okay.
The crowds agreed, and they said they would be there. But they got there and nobody was there, so they got imprisoned and executed.
Oh, so why were they rebelling, the Essex Rebellion?
They didn't like the way the politics were working, basically. They wanted power for themselves.
So it was not they wanted that Essex to be independent?
No, they were just a group of associates of politicians who wanted power for themselves. They gained the support in London, but when the day came, when they actually marched, nobody joined them.
Yeah.
And they were executed.
That's a sad history for them.
It is.
Yeah. So okay, talking about the history.
Yeah.
I want to discuss more about the 1960s, 70s, which I would like to call the heyday of UK. Like
the heyday.
The prime.
Can I ask you why you would consider it the heyday?
Well, at the time, basically the industries were flourishing.
Yeah.
The economy was doing well. I mean, and they did not have any. Basically, they had less colonies, so they didn't have to worry about managing the colonies, or like having to worry about like all the revolution and everything that would go there.
Yeah.
And they were not. The World War II had recently been ended, and that because of that, the boomers, the baby boomers we call them, so they came of age and they started working, and they were very hardworking people who built the country from the ground up, like all the destruction and everything. So and the technology. So the technology was starting to taking its pace, and it was getting to a point where every day there was something new that was coming up, and people had the quality of life increased drastically because during the World War II, UK was very poor. It spent all its money on the war and everything. So because of that, I would like to call it the heyday of UK. Okay, so I don't know if you agree with it.
No, I agree with you to an extent. I would say maybe the only issue was coming to the end of the 1970s. We had something called the Winter of Discontent, which is actually a quote from Shakespeare. I think this was maybe 78 or 79. Basically, what happened is we had a Labour government, so like a social sort of government. This was just before Thatcher. So you can imagine just before Thatcher, there was a huge lack of authority because Thatcher came in and brought heavy authority. And basically, under the previous government, bins were not being taken out. So people's houses had piles of bins outside them. And not only that, but bodies weren't getting taken away. So in Liverpool, people were chucking their bodies of the deceased into the sea. That
is horrible.
However, that was the end of the 1970s. If we're going to talk about the 1960s to the early 1970s, I think it was a great time. And actually, I think it was a great time for Western society, actually. 1968 is considered the real turning point in Western thought, actually.
Why?
Because there were so many movements happening at the time.
So was it like there were many elections going around the world and they had a bunch of these new world powers coming up, like Thatcher in UK and then the Reagan? Was it Reagan in America? Or?
Reagan, in the 80s. But it was really the 60s, which saw the start of, I don't know how you'd call it, but basically French people had some sort of protest that was going on in 68 against the ruling class. This country had some sort of protest in 68. Also, America, they obviously had their civil rights movement. There was also the Stonewall movement, so the gay rights movement. So the 1960s is really seen as the turning point of modern society. Also, I like the 1960s because that's when the Beatles were.
Well, I mean, I don't know if many people, when they hear about UK, so basically the UK drill is very new thing. Before coming to UK, I never knew any one of my friends listening to UK drill,
Yeah.
but I knew all of them listening to Beatles and listening to the Queen as well. It's like a Hey Jude is my favorite song.
Hey Jude's
It's,
brilliant.
Yeah, and
I
Bohemian
like
Rhapsody.
Eleanor Rigby. Have you heard that one?
No.
I recommend it. I love that one. Yeah, I love
So
that
yeah,
one.
so basically now coming back to the recent history.
Yeah.
So what do you think about so after Thatcher, so she brought such a drastic changes to the country. Everything started to become privatized
Right.
and all that. And so do you see this as a progressive change, like when the waste collection is going to a private company, the water distribution is going to a private company, the flag carrier of the country, like the aeroplane, British Airways and everything, that is going to a country. The British Telecom is going to, not going to the country, but going to the private people. The British Telecom being privatized. So everything that had the national flag kind of became privatized after that.
Well, I think any extreme is the sign of an ideology. So if everything's privatized, there's something wrong, I think. And if everything's nationalised, arguably, I think something's wrong too.
Yeah, I will agree with you on that
Margaret
one.
Thatcher believed in something called laissez-faire, which means equal for everyone. Basically, nature decides what happens to you. So the economy cannot touch any people because the economy will fix everything for you. So Margaret Thatcher's ideology was that the government cannot touch privatisation. But she wanted everything privatized.
So is that a good thing though? It's like government can't control anything, so there will be few people in the power controlling the.
Well, the banks grew incredibly in the 1980s. This City of London became the biggest bank in the world, basically, under Margaret Thatcher. But what was not good was the miners. So the manual industry, the people collecting steel and coal, these people were losing their jobs basically to privatization. So it didn't work for every industry, and that's basically what made her get outed.
So what do you think about the privatization of every I mean, in my opinion, so basically the water resources, the energy, and those things should be provided by the government and controlled by the government, because there might come a time when the energy demand is very high, and the government can't just go if the government is in control, they will not be like raising the price of it to get the profit or something like that. But the private company will definitely go for that. They will try to look for the opportunity. And in the opposition of that, so when let's say there is very little resources to get your energy from, and then if the government is in the power, there will be blackouts, but they will be distributing the energy to basically everybody. But if it is a privatized, they will distribute the energy to the highest bidders, and that will be the rich people and the industries. And the commoners or the poor people or the peasants, like they like to call it, they will not have the energy and all those things. So in that sense, it doesn't really. So that's what I don't like about the privatization of the energy and water resource and all those things. It's basically it is in hand of people who are not controlled by the people who use the resources. Basically,
it's the benefit of investors, basically. Something I wanted to talk to you about, however, on the flip side, is in this country we're quite sensitive about the NHS. It's always a political conversation. And to clarify for anyone who doesn't know, that lives outside the UK, we have a nationalised health service that started in 1945 after World War II. This means that everyone pays a small tax, and the government provide inoculation, any treatment. They give you a discount on prescriptions. This worked really well, and this actually is what prevented this whole ignorant class barrier, because everyone after World War II was in the same boat.
Who is the ignorant class?
I think people are ignorant of each other. I think all parties concerned ignore each other.
So it's not the rich people or the poor people. It's like it can be anyone.
It's the thing is, this country, what it is they move together, but they act like aliens in their own family based on who's what class. So the interesting thing about that is the rich. I didn't know this before I came to UK, that rich people have different accent than the poor people. Like the aristocracy, the accent of the way they speak, way they act is it's very different than the normal people. The thing is, accents is quite a big part of this country. We've got over over 80 official accents, I believe, and we're a tiny island.
Yeah.
But the thing is, everyone wants to sound like honest. They want to sound relatable. If you start going off into a posh accent, and I don't mean like BBC, I mean if you start speaking like you're the king, people will think, what an absolute, like, who does he think he is? You know.
So, but the posh accent is there. So there is that accent.
There is that accent, and lots of them are linked to the aristocracy, really.
So yeah, but going a bit of tangent, will you think the accent from Liverpool or accent from Birmingham or accent from Manchester would ever be considered as a posh accent? Well, because I have heard very many articles and many accounts of people saying if you speak in Liverpool accent, people kind of discriminate against you.
Yeah, there's people like to laugh at the Liverpool accent in this country.
But I love Liverpool accent.
Yeah, well, I love the Liverpool accent actually, and people don't realise this. The Beatles actually put on a posh accent.
Oh, okay.
So most of the time they didn't talk in their Liverpool accent, but I think that was very clever of them, because what they did is they slowly integrated the general public's opinion of Liverpool, you know, because they would eventually say some Liverpudlian words, or they would eventually drop a bit, you know, and I think that makes it more acceptable. And
yes.
I think that's why I like the Beatles so much, because they didn't have any reason to be so successful, but they were.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing.
But also the fact that they had to kind of hide it shows how people are a bit unaccepting of those things. And mind you, Liverpool is not that far from Manchester, and Manchester has different accent than the Liverpool. And so having it kind of shows like people are, even though road networks in this country have been there for like thousands of years here, and like the land clearance happened like thousands of years ago, and so, but it still feels like when you look at the accent of each places, which are not, like, let's say 20 miles away from each other, and they have different accent. Yeah. It feels like they were isolated in some way. Yeah. Because accent come about when there is isolation. Like when you go to Australian accent, the Australian accent is there because of the isolation from the other part, and they start coming up with different words, the different expression, and the native language as well. So it kind of feels like that. So it's very surprising why.
Well, I'd like to talk about London at this point.
Yeah, so the Cockney accent.
There's no more diverse place on earth than London. I would just like to state that. Also, I recently saw this interview with this American who's living in London, and they asked him when he was like just standing waiting for the subway. They said, "What is one thing you like about London?" And this guy came from New York, and he said, "What I love is look around you, like." I think it was on the train actually. He said, look around you. There were people, black people, Indian people, Chinese people, Singaporean people, whoever, sitting comfortably on their way to work. Maybe they weren't talking to each other, but they were all going the same place. Yeah. He said, this does not exist in New York. This was his opinion. Okay. I'm not pushing anything. But he said, if this were a New York subway, there would be a section for black people to sit, there would be a section for Indian people to sit, there would be a section for white people to sit. And it's not that that's enforced, it's just that's where they feel most comfortable to sit.
So it's psychological.
Yeah, that's where they choose to sit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas the English people, they don't specifically choose. And I think the reason is because we've got so many people, such small space of land, we live understanding that we have to live on top of each other. Yeah.
And also the immigration has been part of UK for a long time. Yeah. Like the city of London was built by the immigrants. Yeah. Technically they were the immigrants from the Roman Empire, and they built the city of London. And it's fascinating when so basically whenever we from outside, like when you're not in UK and when you're outside, for young people, when you hear about UK and all that, we hear about the Queen. We hear about the football, like the Premier League is very, very huge thing. It's like I have some friends who might not know anything else about the UK, but they will know about the Premier. They will know each and every detail about the Premier League, and that also Premier League also represents the kind of culture that the UK has. So like the chants that you do, the kind of like
their chants are ridiculous. Have you heard some of them?
Oh yeah,
they are hilarious. Like I think everyone's seen it. The young people have probably seen it. But on YouTube, you see these videos of comparing American chants to the British chants. The American chants are like, we believe that we will win. We believe that we will win. Some of the British chants, they're like, we're going home, we're losing, we're going home. Like, it's so like, they just tell it how it is. Yeah. You know, and that's like their comedy. And they're also quite pessimistic. But they're honest, I would say. They're not like the Americans who have this dream They're very, very realistic.
So to get into the American dream, I want to ask you something.
Yeah.
So basically, I also believe British people also have dream, but it's American dream that they have.
I don't agree with that.
And in order to fulfill, they have to go to America. Like, look at all the British actors who become very, very famous worldwide when they go to America.
Yeah.
And if you see, there is a podcaster called Chris Willix or something. His name is that. Yeah. He does his podcast name is Modern Wisdom, and he was. He's from England, and he established his podcast here, and he was here, and now he's moved to America. And you see that trend in basically other people as well. Like when people they start getting famous and getting a bit financially wealthy and all that, they move to America. So it feels like America is the land of if you have enough money, and if you have enough following around you, and if you go to America, you can live the kind of life you can dream of. But in UK, you are kind of like you have to submit
by boundaries. I would say,
yes,
and you have to follow the group. America is very much believes that anyone, no matter who you are, where you're born, you can become the president. This is what Ricky Gervais said, the comedian. He said that you can become president, whereas the English people are told you're never going to be king. So why even try? You know?
Yes. But that's such a place. Well, I mean, of course, you're never going to be king. But also, you can. It also almost feels like you can never be prime minister. In order for you to prime minister, you need to go to either Winchester School or the other top one. What's the other?
Well, there's Eton, which is the junior school, which helps you get into places like Cambridge and Oxford.
Yes. So it feels like you need to be. You can be in the power. You can be the part of aristocracy once you are there. But if you and not everybody can go there. Not everybody can go to Oxford or Cambridge. They can't house everybody. But so it also feels like it's unattainable, even being prime minister, not only king.
Well, I think there's a big change that's happening in our society right now, especially when you look at Prince Harry. You know, Prince Harry's married an American, which during, I believe it was Edward the VIII in 1936, he was the king for only 11 months. He lost his position because he married an American. Why is it that it's now okay to marry Americans? Maybe it's because Princess Diana was a commoner. She wasn't the highest of highest. That could be a reason. But Prince Harry has spoken out against the royalists, and it's rubbed people the wrong way in England, and he's sort of turned into Marmite, you know. Marmite, the notorious food. You love it or you hate it.
Okay.
Anyway, he's...
What is your opinion on him? What is your opinion on Prince Harry? As a young person, as a person who admires the history, admires the history of the kings and the queens, and is also living at the time when maybe not in your lifetime there might be no king in the England in future. Well, I'm not hoping for that, but it might come a time when the England will be ruled by the president, not the king.
Yeah. Well,
so, what do you think?
I think Harry is sensitive, just like his mum was. Diana did so much for charity, and she was a humanitarian essentially. So I think Harry gets that from his mum. But I would say he's definitely more suited to the American lifestyle, and I don't think that's going to make any change in England. I think it's just going to make him be cut off, really.
Okay.
I think that's all that's going to happen.
So he is the part of the royal family that doesn't want to associate himself with the royal things.
They've got the royal people have a bad taste in their mouth about him, especially about the racism stuff. When that came about, it was very surprising. All the things that came about. Well, I don't know if it is true or not, but it's still like the fact that they had to have that conversation and the family broke apart in a way that is not very common in royal family. Like when you look at the history of royal family, that kind of event is not very common. So that was very surprising for me. So you don't. So there is no British dream then. You don't. So this is what I want to talk about. When you were saying that there's no sense of dream, I don't think. I think we're optimistic in a way that's different from the Americans.
But whenever you hear any phrases, let's say, if it is sunshine, like if it is sunshine outside, and everyone would be like, oh yeah, it's gonna rain in the evening, so there is no reason to be very happy about it being the sunshine.
The thing is, we prepare for the worst, but I do believe it's cautious optimism. This country loves a slogan. One of our first slogans was "Keep calm and carry on." That was in World War II. In World War II, and it's this cautious optimism that we exercise, arguably every day. We think it's bad, but we could be starving, we could be at war. There's a lot of things we could be doing that we're not doing. So overall, maybe I'm about 60% good today, So
it's basically like in Top Gear, Jeremy Clarkson and everybody going on, it could be even worse.
Yeah.
That
too bad.
Yeah.
If you ask someone in the UK, how are you? They'll go, not too bad.
Yeah. So they could, yeah. But I think it also prepares you. Like when you become really good, you can actually accept the fact it's getting very nice to you.
Yeah.
So you can actually experience it.
Yeah.
So if you're always expecting something good to happen to you, and when that good actually happens to you, you don't really feel it, because it's like you're expecting it to happen. It's not something that was unexpected.
Yeah.
But when you're expecting it might not be good. Like I should not be so optimistic about it. And then when that good happens to you, like you embrace it with more. More positivity and all that.
Well, I think it's make or break, because some people won't. They're going to go crazy, right? People inevitably they get a taste of power, they get a taste of success, and they go crazy. But the British people, I think they're optimistic. But having said that, I think they are also very pessimistic in a way that Americans aren't, and I think that makes us jealous of Americans, because we see Americans as people who are very happy and who are very proactive, and then we think about things like that are unnecessary to think about, like your class and stuff like that. It's unnecessary to think about it. We waste time doing that, and we get nowhere, because and then we feel even more helpless.
Yeah. So do you think the class system is still present in the UK?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how does that make you feel, the class system? Like, if you had to place yourself in the class system, where would you be?
Oh, I don't know if I have that. I don't know if I have that level of introspective. If I'm completely honest, I try to live as honestly as I can.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty.
Yeah,
but so what makes you the higher class or the upper class, or what makes you lower class? Because it's not wealth.
I think it's virtues.
Okay.
I think it's virtue. Like the coat of arms, the English coat of arms. You talked about the Nepalese coat of arms last episode. Can you remind me of it? 'Cause it's beautiful. Yeah,
so basically our coat of arms has the plain land, the hills, the mountains.
What were the words? Sorry.
The words was the mother and motherland are greater than the heaven.
So the motherland are greater than the heaven.
Yeah.
That I think that shows real loyalty to your people and to your culture.
Okay.
I don't think our motto has the same sense. I think it's much more individualistic, and it's much more virtuous.
What does it mean? It's written in different language. What language is it?
Do et mon droit, and I believe that's Old Norman French.
Okay.
And it means God and my right.
Okay.
So the king has a power because, one, God gave him that power, and two, he has every right to exercise that power.
So the my right in the coat of arms is the king's right. King is saying that it's my right.
That's his right
not
to
the common
rule.
people's.
His right to rule.
Okay.
So he's seen as virtuous. He's seen as like, I don't want to bring in different religions and concepts. He's seen as like Brahman, you know.
Okay. He's the top of the food chain.
He is he's not supposed to think or do anything bad, basically.
Okay.
So people aspire to the king or the queen, but they're also secretly very jealous.
Do you think this is inherent in kings in every country? Because we do see that in other places as well. Like the kings, like they can't make mistake. They are the top of of whatever they are.
Yeah.
And all that. So it's that's it.
But it's funny though, because kings make, like I was discussing the English history, kings make so many mistakes.
Oh yeah, I mean,
they're just people. They're just human beings.
Yeah, and they happen to sometimes forcefully happen to be in the power. Like not all of them wanted to be the kings. Not all of them wanted to rule.
Right.
They wanted to go out and explore. Yeah. So if they were given the opportunity, maybe they would go out and explore the world and all that. So talking about the recent history. Now going back to the history again, can you talk a bit more about the Troubles? Like, why is it called the Troubles? And I was talking about with you this earlier. Like, why doesn't it have like a? Because it sounds like there were horrible things happening. The name is not that horrible. The trouble, the meaning of the word trouble is not
right. So when
connotation is
when
not
we're
that
talking
horrible.
about trouble, we will get to that. But what we're talking about really is Ireland.
Oh, okay.
And that is an extremely sensitive topic.
Okay.
I don't know how far I'm willing to talk about that actually.
I mean, the floor is yours.
Yeah. I don't want to go too far into this because I know it's sensitive in this country.
So do you consider so if you had to consider like for us Nepalese people, Indians are like our cousins. They are very close to us. We share similarities. So like that, if you had to compare England with any other country, would it be Ireland or America or Australia or New Zealand or South Africa? Which one would it be? France. Why?
Because I think the people think the same.
Well, so
they just don't have a king. That's the only difference. But I think they have the same thought processes that the English people do.
So basically, a bit more laid back, a bit more pessimistic.
Maybe a bit selfish. Also, I would say prideful in a sort of silly way. I think they are a bit silly, both of the cultures.
But there is so much to be prideful about, though. Like there was this poet in Nepal who said. His poem when it translates, he says, I hear about the Mount Everest, I hear about the Gokas, I hear about so basically we had an architecture who went to China and started the Chinese architecture, one of the Chinese architecture he started, and we hear about him, so he just says I hear and I hear, so but everything that he talks about is the ancient relics of us, like the Lord Buddha. He was born in ancient time. The architect who went to China and became famous there, it is also ancient compared to now. But there is nothing that is very latest that we can be proud about.
Really?
He says that, and then he says, now I go to the streets and I see hunger everywhere, and I see all the Rams being silent when the Sitas are being basically raped and all that. So he talks about that, and so in that way. But when, in contrast to that, when you come to UK and France and European countries, the inventions that happened, and the
political system and the people, they have real, true, good people, lots of them.
So I think it's right to be prideful about that. I wouldn't. I mean, if someone were to say, "Oh yeah, like the heydays were during the colony time, we had so many people under us." If you are being prideful about that, it does sound a bit. Come on, like ruling over other people.
You had no control about that. Yeah. What I wanted to say, we sort of gone on a tangent. I mean, that is one of our mottos, great tangent. But if we were to link this back to the Troubles, this brings me onto the idea of Ireland, and Ireland are similar to England and the UK.
I would think they are very close to UK.
They are too similar.
Yes, but is that not the good thing?
Well, I think this is a timeless thing that appears in every culture. The people who are too similar, they don't like to associate with. And actually, there's arguably a biological reason. I don't mean to get all fancy-pantsy about this, but the historian Yuval Noah Harari, he believes that the reason that you don't see versions of humans walking around is because they were too similar to the Homo sapiens. So the Homo sapiens killed off the Neanderthals and the Rudolphus and the different brands of Homo, of human, because they were too similar, and they thought they're disgusting and they need to be gone rid of. And I think that was the prevalent attitude in England for a long time about Ireland. And I just wanted to say, not too long ago, maybe the 1970s, it was a very common slogan for you to see outside the front of a pub: no dogs, no blacks, no Irish. They were the three beings that they did not want anywhere near their drinking place.
Why is that? Why is such discrimination against the Irish people?
Well, the Irish were seen as somewhat like their slaves. The potatoes were brought from Peru, and the British, the England and Scotland, basically said, "You're going to work for us." And this idea of "you're going to work for us" has existed since Henry VIII. And I think it gets to Irish people. I genuinely think it gets to people. Something that I saw recently was an interview with Cillian Murphy, you know, the international actor, the Peaky Blinders main guy, the Oppenheimer guy, you know, notorious, famous actor, Cillian Murphy. And he was in an interview with, I think it was a Spanish interview, and there was him and some Brit. And the interviewer went, "So you're both British?" And then Cillian Murphy went, "No, I'm Irish." And the interviewer went, "Yeah, but you both come from the Britain." He goes, "No, I don't come from Britain." And he goes, "Don't you?" Or something like that. And he's actually pissed off because for the Irish people, they see it as ridiculous that they get called British all the time, because their country was actually the opposite. They were not in the cause of Britain. And that's what caused a lot of trouble. And that's what caused the rise in militant ideas in Ireland. And that's what eventually led to the Good Friday Agreement, where we made some amends in Northern Ireland, but unfortunately we had the 7/7 bombings, which is considered the UK's 9/11. It's basically where there were bombs put on buses in London. Yeah.
Was it on 7th of the 7th month?
Yeah.
7th day of the 7th month.
I think it might have been the 7th month of the 7th of 2007.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
Well, I mean, Irish people, they do have a very distinct culture. Even though you say similar pub culture, the other things are very distinct with Irish people. So in that way, if I were to be from Ireland and someone were to call me, "Oh, you're British," and I'm like, "Not really. I mean, we have very distinct culture." I mean, that's where Northern Ireland exists in itself. It's not part of England, or it's not part of Wales. Or it's not part of Scotland. It's Northern Ireland.
The Northern Ireland, they get best of both worlds in some ways. They can identify as British, but they are Irish, meaning they have exceptions. They're allowed to travel freely to Ireland because their family might be Irish. Yeah. And the thing is, lots of Northern Irish, they're actually Protestant, and the South is Catholic. Also, the Ulster in the north, they're considered to be descendants of Scotland, whereas the Gaelic people have been considered to be in there since forever, basically, and they eventually had the Vikings settle in there. But apart from that, they integrate on their own accord. But I suppose it was because of that connection to Scotland and connection to Britain that they needed to draw that line somewhere. They didn't need to draw the line. It's just people thought they did. Well, the ruling class believed they needed to draw a line.
Yeah. So that it would be easier for them to rule.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you did talk about this. It's like all the main companies and factories, they were in London, like, you know, during the colonial times, and they were ruling the colony of Australia or South Africa from here. Like, even though they were not there, they were ruling that place from here without having to go there. And it's very fascinating. It's like the ruling class. If you are a part of ruling class, if you are the part of aristocracy, you don't want to live UK. You don't want to live England. You don't want to live London. You want to be here. Yeah. But all the people, like Australia, notoriously known, like, you know, the history is like, it was the prison, basically. All the prisoners were sent from the Kingdom of England to there, like UK to there. And so it sounds like the people who went out in search of a new land, new opportunity, like, you know, the builders of the American dream, were the people who were from basically the lower class, or like people who were not in like very high, like they were not aristocrats, and the aristocrats who went to those countries went there to rule the pagans or the lower class, or I don't know the right term for
elites.
that.
So they had the intelligence to give the support systems, but the difference is that attitude didn't stick in America, and I think that might have been because they had lots of Irish immigrants. Okay. So the proportion of Irish immigrants to English immigrants, especially aristocratic English immigrants, was very small. So they did not take to the same ideas, I don't think. Actually, something else is interesting to mention is that the English diaspora, meaning the people who are from England, is a lot higher than people realise.
Oh yeah,
but
definitely.
Most of them, their children's children now are Americans.
Yeah, or Australians, or New Zealand.
Well, especially Americans, actually, because America has a giant population.
I find this, like, you know, I have many English friends, and whenever we talk about America, they have this kind of so they don't particularly love them, but they don't particularly hate them, the Americans. Like, you know, the culture of American, because it's something that is not attainable in UK, So,
Yeah.
well, I think the closest thing to America and UK would be going to London, and
Yeah.
but yeah, it's the fascination of British people in Americans is very interesting. Like, would you like to explore more on that? It's like
I want to say that British people are more restrained, and because they're more restrained, I think they're more likely to stick to their values, and that means they don't always want to come out their shell. And I think the thing is, if you're English, you have the name, you have the culture. If you were to live in America, you would be accepted extremely quickly because your culture is basically the ruling culture. And America has very complex relationships with class and with race. Well, race, actually. Race is the big one in America. And I think British people don't want to do that because they have no idea how to live in America, basically. I think it would be too confusing for them.
So it's like so America is basically kind of like a utopia for British people. It's like something
it's a utopia, but at the same time, I don't think. All right, I don't want to say Americans have no values, but it sounds like I'm saying it. Maybe I am slightly saying it, but basically, this country sort of started the transatlantic slavery, and they ended it. And this country ended slavery about 60 years before America did. And it was because the people in this country were not directly affected by racial problems. So the politicians could just make their judgment in peace, basically, because they didn't have to focus on the realistic legitimacies. Someone notable was William Wilberforce. So he was a member of Parliament between 1790 and 1806. Every year that he was in Parliament, he raised the same question, which is, can we ban slavery? And he was extremely irritating to every member of Parliament.
Okay.
But because he was so irritating, they eventually gave in.
Okay, so it was the voice of a one man.
Well, it was a collection of people. There's also Thomas Clarkson. In 1792, he got 20,000 votes in Manchester to stop slavery. So the anti-slavery movement started in London, basically.
And it started in 1700s.
Yeah,
that was a long time.
Yeah, it's quite early actually.
Yeah.
But this law meant that you could no longer buy or sell slaves, but it did mean that people who had slaves could keep them.
Okay.
But I don't think the same attitude existed in America.
At that time, you mean?
At that time, actually, because in the 1800s, the people who were owning slaves were actually recent descendants from England. They carried Victorian values, the slave owners in the southern states. They were more English in some ways than they were American. The rich people in the south, they loved the English and the French, and they felt indifferent to the Northern Americans, and that sort of spurred on their civil war.
Yeah.
So I think.
No, that's interesting. Yeah. It's like even though they were like in this new land where everything could be new, they could have new thought. New way of life, new philosophies and all that, but they stuck with the one they came with, and then they were happy about it.
Yeah.
They did not feel like it was okay. It's a good thing that we need to follow the one what's going on in UK and all that.
Yeah. I think they were people of extremes. I think people of extremes. So there were the people in London saying, stop it right now, we don't need it. But then there were also the adventure capitalists, the sort of people who you imagine as, Leonardo DiCaprio in Django Unchained. These sort of people would have been recent immigrants from England.
Oh, okay.
They were not the people who had been in America since the 1600s. They were people who came very, very recently. They were the ones trying to cling on to slavery.
Oh, okay. So they wanted to basically try the thing that has been going on for a long, long time.
So they really wanted to cling it, the English people moving to America. Whereas the English leaders in London, there were a few loud voices that wanted to stop it, basically.
Yeah. Nice. So after the segue of the history and what happened in the history, what happened in the past, I want to ask you a quick question. You're a student of history. You graduated with a history degree. What do you think is the importance of learning history? And with that question, I want to add, like, what part of history, the British history, was missing that you thought was very significant, but that you didn't get to learn. You had to learn by yourself. But yeah.
So, something significant was definitely the British history, not English history, because Britain is more known for empire than it is known for its statehood, whereas England, you could argue, is more a concept of statehood and more a concept of culture. Britain was an alliance, and it started in 1707 with the Act of Union. Basically, Scotland had failed in Newfoundland and in Panama, and they were losing a lot of money. And England said, look, if you join us, we will work together, we'll build an economy together, and we will invade the Americas together. That was their concept. That was their concept. So English and Scottish united, and they formed the United Kingdom.
So you feel that's the most significant part, which is not being talked about.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I think I will agree with you on that as well, because whenever we learn about British history, it's only about the colony. We don't learn about the other stuff. And like, you know, last time when I was when we were talking about the king and the significance of having or not having king, and one of the argument that came in between us was like, if UK were to get rid of the king, what culture will be left behind? But I think there is so much more cultural stuff in this country that we don't really talk about. So can you and the cultural export of UK as well, like the BBC and all that.
Right.
So could you shed a bit of light on that, like the significance of UK culture and how it has been perpetuated in international territory by BBC and like other forms of media like comedy?
Yeah, definitely. I want to get onto comedy at one point. That links with entertainment, and I would say America and British entertainment's quite global. But specifically about the BBC, they are considered to be the authority, the world authority, and they're considered to be the international experts because they know best.
Oh yeah.
And something like BBC Asia, it will often have reporters who speak received pronunciation. So they're going to speak in a way that sounds very formal and somewhat posh. And they come under heat a lot in this country because they get called biased.
I think my grandfather would agree with you on the fact that they have the authority of being truth. And like we have this, the BBC World Service runs various BBC in different like native languages in Nepal, in India, in Arab countries and all that. Yeah. And my grandfather, every evening when the BBC was like about to come, like he would turn on his radio and he would be like with his hookah or with his like cigarette or something. He would be there and just listening to the news. So they would trust the BBC more than they trusted the national news.
Well, the thing is, I would like to say that there is a very good reason to trust the BBC. This is not me. Can I swear? Yeah. This is not me shitting on the BBC, all right? I respect it to a certain point, and I think they take the piss when they start acting like they're a moral value on global issues. Don't act like you're a moral compass, okay? If you're going to criticize people, criticize them with legitimate arguments. Don't just take on this like moral authority, I would say. Yeah,
because BBC not only represents one channel, it's not like a one television channel, it's the whole country, it's the voice of UK. Right. And whenever they say something in international platform, it sounds like the voice of England. It's like a prime minister giving direction, like you know, giving speeches. It has that influence. And
there's a lot of trust that people put in them. But the thing is, for me personally, I would love it if I could work for BBC Asia.
Definitely.
And if I worked for BBC Asia, something I would like to do is I would like to share this concept called kabuki, which is the Japanese pantomime, basically. And they have beautiful stories of tragedy, stories of heroes, of villains, and it's fascinating, all the paint, all the colours. And I would just love to break that down in like an interview or to break it down in like some news article. And I think these things are beautiful because everyone in the world can see them and everyone in the world can share them. Yeah. But when the UK, under the BBC, starts saying things about Middle Eastern countries, I don't trust them. Yeah. Because I want to know their interests. I want to know the interests of the countries they're telling us not to trust. Not everyone cares about that, but I do. Maybe because I'm weird.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I agree with you on that one.
Because, for example, if I were to get a visa in Iran, my partner, who's Japanese, she, or my girlfriend, usually doesn't always agree with partner as the best definition term. But anyway, my girlfriend, who's Japanese, has the strongest passport in the world. She can go to Iran regardless. If I were to go on the UK government website and click on Iran, it would say, I am recommended under the Foreign Office of Commonwealth, and you can actually search this on your phone, under the Foreign Office of Commonwealth, you are recommended not to go there. Tell us why. Just tell us why. That's all I'm saying. Tell us why. Why don't you tell us why?
Yeah, why? Because of the political reasons, people are being restricted in their movement. It's like, in last podcast, we did talk about human beings are the only animals which are caged by the borders. And especially if you belong to a country which has one of the weakest passports in the world. It's literally a case. Like, you can't, it's not easy to go to other country. They don't, even if you have the financial means, they don't trust you. And so
it's trust. I think it's lack of trust. And
well, I really appreciate the way you articulated that, the way you articulated your frustration against the BBC and also the positive things about the BBC. Like they're, the nature stuff BBC does. The best in the world. Like no one can do the documentaries like the BBC can do.
They have amazing documentaries.
Yes. And so now getting back to the other forms of media, the comedy.
Right.
The BBC comedy. No, not the BBC comedy, sorry. The British comedy. It sounds like you need to have a bit higher IQ to understand BBC comedy. Is that true?
Maybe, I reckon so. Well, the thing is, not to blow my own trumpet, but the UK has a higher IQ than America. Actually, America as a whole.
So, like the collective IQ of...
so I believe the average is 97 in the US, and the average in the UK is 99.
Oh, okay. So it's not that far, though.
It's not a big difference. Anyway. So
what I wanted to point out by saying the higher, like you need to have like high understanding of the politics, the social scenarios that's going on. It's like whenever you listen to Ricky Gervais hosting the Oprah shows, and he talks about things without being unwavered by anything. Like nothing can stop him. He has that kind of persona. And that kind of thing you can find in British comedy as well. It's like it's very open.
Like
it's
we will say the C word.
Yes.
Americans will never use that word.
So it's very, so it feels like that. So please shed more light onto this. Like, what do you think about it?
Well, I think there's many sides of British humour. They're enjoyable, but also there's very simple humour. There's slapstick. There's people like Benny Hill or Mr. Bean or even Charlie Chaplin. These everyone can love and relate to and see them as a bit of a goof. And I think this is quite wholesome. But there are also the more slightly political and outrageous comedians. And I think the outrageous comedians are a testament to that country's government. I think, it's like the court jester we're talking about. So if, for example, in England, a few hundred years ago, they'd have a court jester, guy dressed in ridiculous outfit, looks like the Joker. He makes some horrible comments about the king. If the king laughs, that guy keeps his job and he comes back next time. If the king doesn't laugh, you never see that guy ever again. And that's basically it. So they push the buttons. And I would say because English people push the buttons so much, this government has become extremely tolerant. And that's one of our 5 values is tolerance. And I think nowhere has tolerance as great as the UK. I would say there are people who are very intolerant. I don't know why they're so extreme in this culture.
I agree with you on the being tolerance thing. It's like whenever I love the UK parliament system. It's like the opposition and the main party, they go and they basically, it's like one is arguing for that. The opposition can ask the question to the prime minister. It's like, why didn't you do this? That's very rare. I wish it happened in my country. Our everything is based on kind of the British bureaucracy and all that, but that is not based. I think they had this in mind. It might come to bite someday.
I mean, but Parliament started in France, but I think it was perfected by the English.
I will agree with you on that one.
And in my opinion, I think a parliamentary system is better than a federal system.
Yes.
That's maybe I'm saying that with bias because I live in a constitutional monarchy.
No, I mean, even though there is monarchy, the monarchy doesn't have any power other than the influence they have like they can bring the support of the MPs and all that to a topic, let's say about the Green Revolution and all that. But then but the monarchy doesn't have power. But then
they do have power, but they have soft power, right?
It's not like they can't directly do anything because the consequences are high. It's like if they were to do something so drastic and the people didn't like it, they would be ousted of the power.
Yeah.
But the one thing that, like, if our viewers, if our listeners who don't know about the British Parliament, please go and watch some videos about the British Parliament. Like, the House of Speaker is the most powerful person in that chamber. It's not the Prime Minister.
The Speaker.
And the Speaker can say, Prime Minister, you sit down. It's the turn of the opposition to talk.
Can I say something? The Speaker is from the county of Buckinghamshire. And the county of Buckinghamshire does not have any representatives.
Yeah, because the MP became
the only rep for them is the Speaker. That's interesting, right?
But I love it. I love UK Parliament. It's like it's the if you like comedy, you'll find comedy there. If you like a bit of seriousness, not in this government, but in the government of the.
Do you know about the top hat?
No.
Basically, this was a part of British Parliament until the 1990s.
Yeah.
We've replaced the top hat with a piece of paper, and they do this in Australia.
Oh,
when they want to speak during someone else's speech when they're standing up, instead of waving their hand and distracting people, they simply put their top hat on, or in recent times, they simply do this. And they just wait. They just wait. And I think that's so goofy, but also lovable.
Yeah.
I think that's lovable.
Lovely. So that kind of reflects in the comedy, isn't it? The British comedy is a bit goofy, a bit...
goofy is a good word to describe this comedy.
And so maybe the British comedy is also the kind of comedy that you either like it or you don't like it. Like, you either understand it and love it, or you don't understand it. Like, there is this series called the Minister, S Minister, and then it became S Prime Minister, I think. Okay. And it basically shows how the bureaucracy worked during those days in UK, and I think it still works in that way. It's like Prime Minister can't get anything done. It almost feels like that, and it's like it's the bureaucrats who are basically holding the control of the country, and the British people they take their frustration out in such an articulated way, in form of writing books, in form of comedy, in form of music. Like, it's loved all over the world.
Right. Yeah.
Talking about the literature, we know about the William Shakespeare. We know about what's the other famous poet who was from Ireland but who was widely accepted in
Oscar
UK?
Wilde.
Oscar Wilde.
Oscar
yes.
Wilde.
We know about him.
He was a gay man.
Yeah.
He was a gay man.
Yeah, I recently learned about that, and I think he had to leave the country because of that.
Yeah.
He was being persecuted by someone who didn't really like the homosexuals.
Yeah, there were lots of gay laws at the time.
Yeah.
The gay laws only went out in the 60s. Like I'm talking about this, the 68.
Yeah.
Big year, yeah.
And then there is Bertrand Russell. I'm a big fan of Bertrand Russell.
You know what? I don't know much about this individual. Maybe if you reference something, I might ring a bell.
So there is a book he wrote. It's the collection of essays he wrote. It's called The Skeptical Essays. So basically, he is teaching you to be skeptic, but not in the way that you don't trust anything or you don't believe anything. But he basically says you need to question things that you see, and it's so relevant at this point. Like, when I read that book and he talks about, can human beings be rational, and is it okay to be rational?
Yeah.
What kind of people become rational? And so there was, I think, one of the poem or one of the essay that we read that I studied in our high school. I didn't even know who Bertrand Russell was until I came here. And I was listening to this documentary where he talks about the World War I was avoidable, and he shows his frustration, like why the people didn't try to avoid the World War I and all that. And I wish you knew more about that. I would love to have that conversation with you.
Research. I'm sure people would be saying things in the comments section.
Yeah.
About researching him. I'm going to do something very unprofessional right now. I'm going to grab my phone because it's on charge. But there's a guy I want to talk about, and that is George Orwell.
Oh, wow, nice. Amazing.
Just a second.
We have 10 minutes to complete this.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So
we're bounded by the time.
Yeah, on my phone I have a quote, and I thought it was so beautiful. It's from the book 1984.
Oh, my favorite book.
So this book was hated in the Soviet Union because it could really rupture ideology.
Yes.
And governments that operate on ideology, they have a strict dogma, meaning everything makes sense because they've written it in a way that makes sense. And this guy came along and he was basically saying, I'll tell you what's beautiful is people finding love, or people seeing a beautiful piece of art, and that really peed off the Russians at the time because they didn't want people to be that individual.
Would you say Franz Kafka was highly influenced by George Orwell?
I'm not too sure who that is. Sorry.
Franz Kafka, the writer of the book Metamorphosis, and also The Trial, because I find many similarities between the book Trial and 1984. Maybe it's because I haven't finished the book, but
The Trial, you say?
The Trial.
The Trial. Okay.
The Trial.
This is the quote I want to bring up.
Yeah, please.
So, Orwell, 1984, page 252. I'll do my reading voice.
Lovely.
Everywhere stood the same solid, unconquerable figure, a man made monstrous by work and childbearing, toiling from birth till death, and still singing.
Wow. That is amazing.
How aggravating that people can be in such poverty and laugh.
See, to be human, you don't need to be rich. To have human emotions, you don't need to have lots of money. You can have happiness without being rich. I mean, of course, when I say this, and when there have been lots of people going through poverty, and at this time, at this day and age, it seems so impossible to be happy without having money because we have monetized everything. Everything has to have a transactional value. So because of that, everything is clinged. Everyone wants to be successful because everyone tells them to be successful.
Right. So it's not even their own idea. What we need is a bit of originality. And actually, this is another George Orwell thing. I love this book because I read it recently. It's called Own Life. So Orwell claims this term called own life. And it's self-explanatory. It literally means get your own life.
Yep.
Live in your space with your mind.
Be yourself.
Don't spend all this ridiculous amount of time focusing on, what am I supposed to be doing right now? This nonsense.
Yeah. So basically, from today in our podcast, we're starting a segment called a 0 Hour Thought, where Jimmy, he read about something, and I'm gonna read about something. It could be something that we wrote by ourselves, or it could be something that we read and it was so fascinating or so moving that we want every one of our viewers, every one of our listeners to listen to.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure how nicely I would be able to articulate this, and I wrote this when I was on a bus today. So the topic is the horror of success. I hunger, I starve, I yearn, I ache. I'm slowly annihilating myself for that sweet nectar of success. These desires, these pains are not solely my own. They have been cultivated, implanted by the society fixated on success. Life's meaning, they say, is chained to the elusive achievement, yet in this realization lies a profound sorrow, as I have come to understanding the fallacy they instilled within me. Still, it clings stubbornly like a scar on my face. I'm a human after all, maddened and pallid by this scar. Oh dear me, how pitiful it is to spend a lifetime in perpetual yearning, slowly unraveling the fabric of one's existence thread by thread. Thank you, everybody.